Allora, ragazzi, oggi vediamo qualche filmato. Sul Path of Exile 2, se riusciamo a farle. Allora, per la gente cerchiamo di far partire sta live per vedere qualche contenuto su Path of Exile 2 e vediamo qualche filmato. Se riusciamo. Ok, parte un po'. Ok, vediamo qualche filmato, fa vedere diverse classi, perché i curiosi vuol dare un'occhiata. Daremo un po' in live, se vi interessa, vediamo.
Act 3 is set in the ruins of the Val civilization which fell thousands of years ago. Jungle has taken over their former once-great cities, and we'll be exploring using one of our 6 new character classes called the Monk. In PoE 1, we had one character class for each of the combinations of strength, dexterity, and intelligence. When looking at the design of PoE 2, though, we realized that many of the new skills we were trying to design just didn't really fit thematically with the existing classes that we have. Being a spellcaster with a bear form makes sense for strength int, but it doesn't really sound like something a Templar would do. We realized that since we had new mechanics for every attribute combination, it actually made sense to design new character classes to explore the new themes. In PoE 2, every attribute combination has 2 classes associated with it. Strength int has the Templar or the Druid. On Dexterity you have the Ranger or the more spare-focused Huntress. And on Dex int you have the Shadow and the Monk, which Mark is playing here. The quest rewards you're offered on the 2 variants are tailored to the class. But of course, this is PoE. You can still mix and match anything to your heart's content, and they both start in the same location on the passive tree. The most important difference between the 2 is the Ascendancy classes. Each class has own 3 Ascendancies that let you further specialize the class in a way that only that class has access to. Looks like we've come across the boss for this area. In PoE 2, every area of the campaign contains a boss of at least this difficulty. That's over 100 bosses to fight as you make your way through the campaign, and they all have unique mechanics to learn. From watching Mark fighting, the melee combat in PoE 2 has a very different feel than before. We've done a lot of things to add mobility to combat. Practically every melee skill in PoE 2 has some kind of movement to it. The Monk in particular is a melee fighter who specializes in mobility over brute strength. So as Mark has been playing, you might have noticed these blue markers over enemies. Mark is a skill equipped called Killing Palm. Whenever an enemy has a blue indicator over it, it means the monster has low enough life to cull with Killing Palm. Using Killing Palm on an enemy will cull it, giving you a power charge. This is an important skill for the monk since many of his skills interact with power charges. One of the great things about the skill is it has a built-in dash forward, which makes it much easier to target the skill right at the point where you need it. We've done a lot of work in PoE 2 to make using skills like this feel satisfying. If you're accidentally targeting slightly off a monster, the skill will automatically lock on to a cullable target, and will even do a small amount of pathfinding around obstacles. We really want to make sure that when an opportunity to use the skill presents itself, nothing is going to get in your way. Once you've got some power charges, you need some skills to power up. A great follow-up is Falling Thunder. Falling Thunder without a power charge just creates a relatively small lightning AoE in front of you. But do it with some power charges and it turns into a pack clearer with a large number of projectiles. One thing to notice here is that, like almost every melee skill in PoE 2, Falling Thunder has a little bit of extra movement built in just in case you need it. Using the skill within range, you do a flip in place. But use it slightly further, and your character will move forward while executing it, getting you into position without any time penalty. In PoE 2, you also get a short period to redirect your target. Notice how you can start a skill facing one way, then whip the mouse sideways to land the skill in a different direction. In order to get some power charges, you're going to first need to get some lower life monsters into a cullable range. You've got a few options. If you want to charge right in, Whirling Assault is a great option. It doesn't do much damage per hit, but it covers a lot of ground. And notice how you can turn as you do it? Generally speaking, you never lose control of your character in PoE 2. If you make a turn at the right time, you can get a couple of extra hits in on the monsters, getting them in range of your cull. Follow up with a Killing Palm, then finish off the rest of the pack with your Falling Thunder. We've now entered the Val Mechanarium. This is the place where the Val built the various constructs they relied on to power their civilization.
Now this is a find! A Val ruin that hasn't been looted? I wonder why nobody's been in here before.
One useful feature that we've added is the ability to call in NPCs to where you are,
Ancora c'è
give you more
Alva.
information or help you with quest objectives, rather than having to always go back to town. In this case, we've called in Alva to find out what to do.
This mechanism, if powered with a small soul core, it could open that
Buon pomeriggio a
door.
tutti.
There should definitely be soul cores somewhere around here. They had to power these constructs
Cazzeggiamo un po'
somehow.
guardando qualche video di Path of Exile 2
Need to
nelle
go
varie
find a soul
classi.
core to open this door, just like Alva said. So let's
Per
explore.
curiosità. Questo è il
If you
monaco.
want to shave off some life without getting too close to some of the more dangerous monsters, a great option is Wind Blast. Wind Blast also doesn't do too much damage, but it keeps the enemies back. The closer they are, the farther they're pushed back, so it's a great option for keeping smaller but higher damage enemies at bay. Note that the bigger the enemy is, the less they will be pushed back, so trying to push back some giants isn't going to be as effective. And there's the soul core. Let's get back to the door.
Your fate is sealed.
Volta.
Considerably impressed. I'll keep investigating in here. Bring me in if you find anything else.
Now, if you need to defeat tougher enemies, it might be time to break out some of the monk's ice skills. Glacial Cascade creates a wave of ice that moves slowly in front of the player. It's pretty ineffective against fast-moving monsters because the damage occurs right at the end of the wave. A lot of monsters are just going to walk right by it, but if you can find a way to make a monster stop at just the right place, it can be very effective. In order to do that, you're probably going to want to be able to freeze monsters in place. Monk has a few different tools to do this. A fairly simple option is to get right in the monster's face with Ice Strike. Ice Strike doesn't do too much damage on its own, but attack 3 times in sequence and you'll get off a combo that has a much higher chance to freeze. Get in there with the freeze, then roll back and finish the job with Glacial Cascade. Remember how Glacial Cascade is that extra damaging spike at the end? If you hit frozen enemies with that spike, it shatters, dealing a large amount of damage. This is really great against bosses. And, did I just casually mention roll back? Did we forget to mention that in PoE 2 we added a dodge roll to every character? Just press spacebar at any time to roll. There's no cooldown, no limitations. It even has a bit of pathfinding to it so you don't get stuck on things. When you dodge roll, you're not
Schivata, non ha
invulnerable.
cooldown.
If something hits you, you are going to feel it, but most things aren't going to hit you. And that's because while rolling,
Serve per
projectiles and melee
anticipare
strikes will always miss.
l'essere colpiti. Quindi se sei su una UE e la usi sulla UE, vieni preso. Devi uscirne fuori prima che viene lanciato, insomma.
Another really important function of dodge roll is that it lets you cancel out of almost any skill at any time. This makes it so you don't feel like you're getting stuck doing long animations where something is about to hit you. It really changes how skills with longer attack and cast times play, and makes dodge roll a very reliable feeling way to avoid attacks.
L'ho subito tra le varie armi, è più semplificato e ce ne sono alcune che hanno direttamente una skill loro innata, diciamo, senza inserire skill gem.
You move backwards and throw out a cold attack with a significant freeze chance. A great thing about this is it puts you in a great distance to follow up with Glacial Cascade to do a whole pile of damage. Another skill you can use to get some extra freeze is Shattering Palm. Shattering Palm is a palm strike that puts a small ice bomb on the target. Killing the enemy will cause the bomb to explode, dealing some damage and a significant freeze. It's a great option against bosses where the wave of ice might not be enough to get that freeze off, but you really want to get the Glacial Cascade damage bonus.
Get back!
The final skill we're going to show you today is Flicker Strike. It's a monk skill now, and another skill that consumes power charges. If you've played PoE 1, you know what to expect. It's a great finisher for tough bosses if you're able to get some power charges beforehand.
Face your demise.
Now, in order to take down this boss, we're going to need all the tools in the monk's arsenal, especially the combo of Freeze and Glacial Cascade. If you're a PoE 1 player, you might think that you can't rely on Freeze because there's so many bosses that are immune to it, but in PoE 2, that's changing significantly. In PoE 1, Freeze is a binary mechanic. An attack freezes the target or it doesn't. What this basically means is that in PoE 1 we were forced to add freeze immunity to many bosses because Freeze just trivialized them. Because of that, freezing was something you could only really use while pack clearing, and not something you could really rely on as a core part of your build for boss fighting. In PoE 2, all crowd control mechanics now have internal meters that allow you to build up to a freeze or stun, or whatever other CC mechanic that you're using. It's a little bit like poise from games like Elden Ring, though the meters seem to be a bit smaller. When you freeze an enemy, it increases the amount of freeze that you need to do another freeze, but the increased difficulty bleeds away slowly. More freeze will always let you freeze the boss more often, but this system means it will not get out of control in party play or interact badly with other CC mechanics, allowing us to let you use these kinds of mechanics against all bosses.
Face your demise.
Blackjaw has dropped a consumable quest item called the Flame Core. It's a permanent plus 10 to spirit. In PoE 2, we really wanted to make sure that you feel rewarded for
Quello aumenta lo
exploration.
spirito. Lo spirito è la nuova statistica che serve per riservare le aure.
One of the things you might find
Tutte
in
quelle
killing
gemme
boss,
simili.
permanent stat bonuses to your character.
Your end comes. Your fate is sealed.
più avanti un attimo.
And this is a great opportunity to explain the way that we have changed caster weapons in PoE 2. In PoE 1, caster need to get some more. Spirit is available on mods from items and sorceress to be. He doesn't have the defense. In order to help us with the next area, we're going to call in a sorceress. Mark's friend Octavian has invited him to a party, and we're going to accept. The sorceress in town here is the new intelligence-focused character in PoE 2. While the witch focuses more on occult magic and summoning, the sorceress is themed around pure elemental destruction. Let's have a look at how she plays.
All the vaunted technology of the Val, and look where it got them. Dead and buried.
Questo qua è un cop.
This is the largest soul core I've ever seen. With this, we could power the canal systems. But it isn't charged. There is still latent energy in this machinarium from its ancient operation. These lines in the stonework should lead to generators. You might need to find some more soul cores to spin them up, but everything looks to be in surprisingly decent condition. Maybe the golems have been maintaining it. In any case, it should still function.
Beh, questo ce lo puoi
We have some
fare.
skills here that you probably recognize if you've played PoE 1 before, but they feel a bit different to play with now. Spark is great in these tight passages since it bounces around. We've added a PS support gem to it to allow it to really hit an entire room full of targets. For a more single target focused skill, Arc is a great choice.
Bordello.
It does more damage to the first target you hit. If you find yourself surrounded, it might be a good idea to use Ice Nova. It hits all enemies around you and slows them down with chill. Just be careful. Getting up close and personal isn't the ideal place for a sorceress to be. He doesn't have the defenses of a more melee-oriented character. But in order to help the sorceress's weak melee defense, you could use Arctic Armor. In PoE 2, Arctic Armor is a buff that builds up as you stand still. You can see the ice crystals forming around the character. They drop off if you walk around. When monsters hit you, they take cold damage and build up to a freeze, so it's a great defense. Just be careful. You have to be standing still for a little while to get the full effect, so trying to start a step using it isn't the best strategy. Now, Arctic Armor is an ongoing buff. Did you notice that it didn't reserve any mana? How does that work? Well, in PoE 2, we were kind of sick of the fact that basically every character was playing with no mana pool. We decided to change the way that reservation works. There's a new resource in PoE 2 called Spirit. Spirit is a dedicated resource that you can use for ongoing effects like Arctic Armor, Heralds, Auras, or even Minions. Everyone starts with 100 Spirit, which is enough for most ongoing effects. But if you want to use more than one of them, you're going to need to get some more. Spirit is available on mods from items and on the passive tree. But if you're willing to go up your offhand slot, the easiest way to get it is by holding a scepter. Find out more about that in the items talk later on.
Mentre skill si fa che non si mette
Now, if you want to increase the cold damage you're dealing, you can use Frost Bomb. It places a bomb on the ground that reduces enemies' cold resistance while it's ticking down. It's a great opportunity to use some cold skills before it explodes. And speaking of cold skills, a great skill to use on monsters with lower cold resistance is Comet. This is a new skill in PoE 2 and it hits pretty damn hard. It costs a lot of mana and has a really long cast time, but it's well worth the wait. It does a devastating amount of damage. To help get you out of danger, your character moves back slightly as it casts. It's pretty hard to hit fast-moving opponents, but it's great on tougher enemies that stand still, or even a larger pack if you're further away and can predict where they're going to move. If you run out of mana casting too many of those, then in an emergency, I guess you could use your Fireball. And this is a great opportunity to explain the way that we've changed caster weapons in PoE 2. In PoE 1, caster weapons had a default melee attack that nobody used. And because they had that, they also had a bunch of attack mods that would spawn in them, that were useless to a caster. In PoE 2 we wanted to clean all of that up, so now each staff comes with a built-in free-to-cast spell. Just put it on and spam to your heart's content. Now this particular staff is the base type that you get right at the starting beach, and it's quite likely that you're going to outgrow it, so that's why we also have a lot of staves with more utility-focused powers for casters to use. Here we have a crystal staff, and has a pretty cool built-in spell called Unleash. Using it slams your staff on the ground and will allow you to triple cast your next spell. Now of course you're probably going to want to use that with something powerful, and Comet is a great option. You will notice that Unleash is one of the few skills in PoE 2 with a cooldown. In general, we really try to avoid using cooldowns because we really hate the feeling that combat is just waiting to be able to use your next skill. But it does make sense for Unleash since it's free to cast and it's something you want to use situationally anyway. Now if you're really facing some tough monsters, you might want to try out Mana Tempest. Mana Tempest creates a circle of power in which you literally hover over the ground. While in the circle, your mana drains, but it powers up all your spells. Lightning projectiles fork, beams will chain further, and you also do a lot more damage.
Bello.
So with all of these skills, here's a great combo to try. First, cast Frost Bomb to reduce the target's cold resistance. Then use Mana Tempest to increase your damage. Follow up with Unleash, and then triple cast Comet to do a truly insane amount of damage.
I need more time.
This rare monster dropped an uncut gem. This is a great opportunity to talk about how skill gems drop in PoE 2. Instead of dropping a specific gem, you can find uncut gems. Just right click on them and pick whatever skill you want. The gem will come pre-leveled to the level of the area that dropped it, so it's a lot easier to change between skills in PoE 2. This time, I think it might be cool to grab one of our meta gems. Meta gems are skills that can have other skills socketed into them, changing how they work. In this case, we're going to select Cast on Shock. Now, let's equip this thing in the skill screen and choose a spell to trigger with it. I think Comet might be fun. Because Cast on Shock reserves Spirit, we'll need to first disable our Arctic Armor. We have to decide if we would rather have the extra defense or the extra offense of the Cast on Shock. Now in PoE 2, trigger gems use a system of filling up cast time on each trigger. Basically, if a skill has a short cast time, then it will trigger really often. And if it has a long cast time, like Comet does, it will take longer to trigger. As we use our skills on these monsters, you can see that there's a thing that's charging up in the top left corner. At 100%, the Comet comes down. So there you are, using Cast on Shock will automatically cast Comet whenever we're using our lightning skills. So, we've found the generator and the soul core. It's time to power it up.
Rosso nero. Roulette russa.
As power is restored to the Mechanarium, all the constructs are coming back to life. We need to fight them on the way back to the charged soul core. So, one thing that PoE 1 players might have noticed is that this character has both ice and lightning spells. That's pretty inefficient, isn't it? It's a big no-no for most builds because any specialization into cold or lightning isn't going to affect the other element. And generic elemental damage increases are not going to be as powerful as focusing on a single element. Well, in PoE 2 we have another major new system to introduce to solve these kinds of problems, and it starts with weapon swap. Now in PoE 1, weapon swap isn't really used very much for its intended use case. We imagined that people were going to be swapping in and out between different weapons to deal with whatever situation they were in. People just don't do that at all, and a large reason for that is because it's really awkward. In PoE 2 we wanted to solve that. The staff Octavian is using here has an ice mod on it that makes it great for when he's using his ice spells. We would also like to be able to make sure that this build works just as well for lightning spells on the character too. If Octavian equips his previous staff in his second weapon set, you can see that it appears on the character's back. Now we're going to open up the skill screen. If Octavian opens the skill options for his lightning skills, you can see here that you can choose which weapon sets are usable with each skill. First we uncheck set 1 from being used by his lightning skills. Then we're going to go through his cold skills one by one and turn those off with his lightning weapon. Now when we use Spark, the character will automatically switch to the lightning staff on his back and then use the skill.
nelle varie
When
armi.
Octavian uses the Ice Nova, his character will automatically switch over to the Ice Staff before using it. You can configure each skill for which set to use, or both if you don't mind which. There's a very short time penalty to switching, so it can be good to leave some skills on both sets if it doesn't matter which weapon set
Auto
you're using.
switch.
But we still have the problem of passives. Wouldn't it be nice if we could specialize in both cold and lightning passives on a character? Well, in PoE 2 you can. We're on the passive skill screen here, and you can see that we are close to both a cold and a lightning cluster. At the top right of the screen, you can see that we have some weapon set specific points to allocate. If Octavian holds shift, he can allocate set 1 to the cold passives, and then set 2 to the lightning passives. Now check this out. As we weapon swap, our passive tree changes from one build to the other automatically. Whenever we cast the appropriate spell, the character's passives reconfigure on the fly to the correct build for that spell. Now you can't do this with every passive on your tree. Only points granted from skill books will allow this kind of dual specialization. So you can't change from a mace slamming warrior into a fire elementalist with the press of a button. But it certainly increases the number of options you have for builds. There are a huge number of places where the system can shine. You could augment your dagger shadow build with traps, or have a great curse set up on your witch in one spec and then move to your chaos debuff spells with the other. It really opens up your options. Another fun meta gem to try out is called Barrier Invocation. This works a little bit like the trigger gems I talked about before, but this one charges up as your energy shield is hit by monsters. We're going to put Ice Nova in this one. Now, the way this works is that the more shield you lose, the more charge will build up until the point that you're able to cast the skill you socketed instantly.
Tiri qua un po' con la barriera.
Take some damage and then at just the right time, invoke Ice Nova to deal a massive amount of damage to all of your foes in one massive attack.
Perché poi bot
If you keep losing shield, you'll keep building up even more charge, even more casts. So it's great to use in an emergency for a quick bit of defense. Here we are, back at the charged soul core. All we have to do now is take it.
Collegato tutto.
Now we just have to remove it from that construct.
Allora se ne va. Chiama il morto, se ne va.
That to you.
Che stronza.
Get back!
Addosso un po'.
Death comes!
Un po' mezzo anche da tank, diciamo.
Your fate is sealed! Stay still!
vediamo cos'altro c'è. Perché sì. Beh, non si sa che cazzo succede ogni tanto. Ok. Si mette inceppato. Niente, non voglio sapere. Sai, adesso non ne voglia.
I'm certainly not supposed to be here. How exciting.
Diamo un'occhiata se per caso nel mentre. Sì, sta schizza tutto. Oh. Ok. Beh, abbiamo visto qualche filmato di Pot of Exile mentre c'era l'aggiornamento su On December. Che chissà perché dà di matto così. Qual è il tuo problema? No, non so perché. Beh. Torna in cima. Ok, vabbè. Allora interrompiamo un attimo la live, ragazzi, che ce la farò un po' di robine, poi torniamo dopo, più tardi su On December, per chi vuole seguire la live e vedere due robe. Io intanto vi ringrazio per la presenza, buon pomeriggio a tutti, buon proseguimento, buon game, come sempre, mi raccomando, fate i bravi, non fate i tossici, sono solo videogames. Grazie a tutti per la compagnia.